When you play the Game of Thrones, you
Subscribe and like.
or you die. There is no middle ground.
Alright, hello YouTube, welcome back to the Grease Goblins YouTube channel. Today's video, we're going to be kind of taking like a step back and talking about A Dream of Spring. I've done a lot of videos on this channel talking about wins, and I try to be very positive in those videos about when I think we could possibly get wins, if we're even going to get it. And this video is going to be my realistic take on A Dream of Spring, and if we're going to get it, and what is the most likely that we could get it. And again, we have to do some guessing. We have to do some guesswork on when I think Winds of Winter could come out. So again, a lot of speculation, and I want you guys to let me know down in the comments. Try to be very civil about it, because I know this is a very hot topic in, you know, the Song of Ice and Fire community. So if you disagree with someone's opinion in the comments, try to be very civil about it. Do you guys think we will ever get the conclusion of this story? So that is going to be the main focus of today's video. And if you guys like to like, subscribe, and comment for more of this type of Song of Ice and Fire content, please do. We're currently doing a reread right now, and we do some other videos talking about just the characters or certain plot points within the story. Now, let's look at the timeline of A Song of Ice and Fire books, because I think it's very important to understand if we're going to, A, get the books and how long we could maybe get them. I also want to look at George R.R. Martin at this point is 74 years old. I know this gets brought up so much. And again, I would love George R.R. Martin to live forever, live till he's 100. But again, I want to be realistic in this video, which means there's going to be a certain amount of negativity within that. People don't live forever. And George R.R. Martin is not, you know, the most in shape person. He's not the most healthy person in the world. And life can be very unfair. Life can just be unpredictable. My grandfather was very healthy. He was very in shape. He was very active. He still died in his early 80s. So, again, I want you guys to keep that in mind when we're talking about George, who's 74. Again, this is, you know, I hope he lives forever, but that's just, you know, put that into perspective. So when we look at the first 3 books, we can tell George really had a major focus, and he had a plan. He had where he wanted the story to go in these first 3 books, and that's why it didn't really take him that long. Also, he wasn't as famous at this point. He wasn't, you know, rich. He didn't have a lot of other opportunities. This was his livelihood and trying to pay the bills, more or less. So when we look at the first book, A Game of Thrones was released in 1996, and for the first 3 books, we would follow a 2-year gap. So we would have 1996 for Game of Thrones, A Clash of Kings was 1998, and then Storm of Swords was 2000. Now, even after Storm of Swords, there actually wasn't that long of a period in between the next 2 books, which is actually remarkable, because we know that George R.R. Martin had a completely different plan for Feast and Dance, where he wanted it to be this time skip, or this gap in between those 2 books, and he ended up scrapping that idea. He had to rewrite a lot of it and completely change what he was going to do. And even then, it only took him 5 years, so 2000 to 2005, and then we see another 6-year gap to Dance, which again, rewriting all of his things, reconceptualizing everything. I think that's actually very understandable, considering how big those books are and what he had to change and his plan had to adapt overall. So now we've gotten to this point where, again, 2011 was the last main series book that we got. It's now 2023. You know, we're in that 12th year from the last book. And I think a lot of things that we look at with George, and whether that's being, you know, living his life, he's come into this role of prominence, being able to experience things that not a lot of people will get to experience. And the weirdest part is experiencing it later in life, and whether that's him wanting to do projects like movies, games, shows, exploring the world more, it's definitely factored into why Winds has not come out. But you also look at, and we've talked about this a lot, this is the hardest book probably to write, just based upon having to get all of these characters that have only expanded. We've only gotten more characters. We haven't gotten less. to either killing characters off or bringing them all into one place, very difficult to do. We see how the show struggled a lot with that. And this video is not about wins, so let me skip to the point. And if I was going to do some guesswork for wins, George has been talking a bit more positively about it, it would seem recently. Like he's willing to, suggest how far he is in the book. He's every once in a while mentioning that he gets these chapters. And I think at the earliest, we get this book end of 2024 around Christmas time. So if that happens, I want you guys to remember, at this time, George is now 76. Dream of Spring, regardless if he has the whole thing planned out, he knows what he's got to do, still going to be an extremely long book, probably. Even with the path laid out, right? It's still going to be a much bigger book than the first three. I don't see a world where he completes Dream of Spring in less than 3 years. I would be leaning towards 5 years. So the question we have to ask ourselves is, do we think we are going to get a Dream of Spring when George R.R. Martin is 81 years old? That's going off of how I view him being able to write. And again, him getting older, it's only going to get harder to write. Think about it. When it was 1996, okay, for the first Game of Thrones book, right? This is crazy. This is going to make a lot of you feel old. This is before I was even born. Like, I was born in 2000. 3 of the books had been basically completed by the time I was born. It was released in August 1st, so it was released in August, and I want to do some backtracking there. So, it has been 26 years since the first book came out. And if we're going off of George's age, George was in his late 40s, getting into his 50s. Your ability to write and work long hours then versus your late 70s or your mid to late 70s into your 80s is astronomical. And again, this is factoring that hopefully George has no health issues during any of this time. I'm not even talking about death. I'm just talking about any setbacks where as you get older, your body breaks down and sometimes just things happen. I am someone that is fairly positive we're going to get Winds of Winter. But man, a lot of things have got to go right for us to get Dream of Spring. And that's got to factor in, again, this is the other thing that people don't understand when it comes to books. It's not just about writing the book, right? When Winds of Winter is about to come out, for instance, we are going to see a massive marketing campaign. Also, you have to look at things like editing, right? It's not that just George has to write it. It has to go through editing, has to be printed out, because again, anyone in their right mind should know when Winds of Winter comes out, it's going to be it's going to be a best-selling book. Like, it's the most anticipated book in, I think, the book space right now. To me, it's just the way it's going to go. And to me, when you look at that, yes, he could be done by the end of this year. But you don't just release it at the end of this year. You got to have some other things happen. So that's my whole idea here, is that if George writes it in 4 years, right, that 5th year, you're probably going to have a bunch of marketing and stuff like that. And it wasn't as big of a thing, right, when it came to the first 3 books, because he wasn't as popular yet. So you didn't have as much of that going on. Whereas right now, George is one of, if not the biggest name right now, outside of people like Tolkien, some of our bigger writers, he is one of the biggest names in fantasy. So to me, it's a tough situation because I personally don't think we're going to get Dream of Spring. I know that's what this video has been leading towards. I know that's what you guys have been wanting me to answer, because a lot of people ask me this, whether it's in streams, whether it's in YouTube comments, and unfortunately and sadly, I don't think if we get a Dream of Spring, it's not going to be by George. It's going to be by either a team of writers that he says can, finish out the book. He gives them more or less what's supposed to happen, and that's how it ends. Or we're never going to get it, because I don't see George being able to get it done, especially with what we've seen with wins. I mean, just think about it. We're going into our 12th year, and I get it. Like, he could really figure out how he wants to end the story, but that's just not how George, I feel like, writes. And as the book expands, George is constantly rewriting things. He, doubles back on things that maybe he didn't like or didn't make sense. I don't know. You guys have to let me know what you think. And again, I think at the earliest this gets done, like 2029, maybe 2030. Like, I don't know. I think we are still a far away from A Dream of Spring. And as of right now, it's still a dream. I think The Winds of Winter is much more realistic. I think it could happen at the end of 2024 on a positive note. Maybe more realistic me points to the end of 2025. Either way, with Winds of Winter, it's going to happen during Christmas time. It just makes sense. It's got the winter title. You release it right around Christmas. That's usually when you would do things like that. It's pretty much how it always goes. Now, Dream of Spring's a little different. You could actually just release that in the spring because it makes sense. Like, release it around, like, Easter time. But, I don't know. Let me know what you guys think, and I will see you guys all in the next video. Bye, guys.